Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we discuss the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
We pick from the thousands of business books out there and test the author's ideas by comparing them to real-world challenges. With over 40 years of projects between us, we've got quite a bit to compare against.
We give you the condensed takeaways, followed by our interview with the author. We know you want actions, not theories, and it is actions that we want to help shape, because that's what the Wicked Podcast is all about.
So, Marcus, typically we read a book and then we invite the author on to discuss the book. In this particular case, for the author of Up the Organization, the author's not around anymore. So you did a really great job in going to find Tom Peters, and we were really lucky to get time with him. He's written a couple of books subsequently, like In Search of Excellence. But at the end of the day today, we've got so much going on with COVID. What Tom really wanted to do was have more of a general chat. So what I'd like to do, because we don't want to cheat our audience, what are the three big takeaways that we got from reading Up the Organization?
Yes, so we went a bit off format for that one, but given the COVID-19 situation and given that we can talk to someone like Tom, who's been in the business for over 40 years and who's from the same generation as Robert Townsend, and there's a connection between them. It was great to approach it as, what do organizations really need today? Has it changed from over 50, 60 years ago? Is there any new wisdom? Is the old wisdom still valid? It was a great conversation. Now, interestingly, even though we were starting at a different point with the conversation, both in Robert Townsend's book and the evidence and the stories Tom told us, what it comes down to, in my opinion, is it's all about people. It's evident when you listen to the interview and when you read Robert's book, because Robert says, well, you can start reading the book anywhere you like. It's full of lots of little stories, but if you want a particular good point to start the book with, start with the people section. And that came through the interview with Tom as well. It's all about people. The significant difference of more successful and less successful organization lies in how much they enable their people. As an organization, you're in the people business. That's your greatest value and asset and opportunity. And if you do it right, you have an amazing organization that can adapt to anything. And if you not do it right, then you're being very ineffective and you will struggle all the way. So my main takeaway is it's about people.
And on that point, if we look back to one of our previous episodes, Sunny Giles, she covers a lot of the very much the same ideas, which is people at the edge of the organization need to be empowered to be able to make decisions. So again, it's building an organization with power all the way through the organization and especially at the edge and pulling that forward. And I think whether we're talking about, Sunny's book, The New Science of Radical Innovation, or Robert Townsend's Up the Organization, or Tom Peters' book, In Search of Excellence, a lot of these ideas have been around for a long time. And during the interview, you make some really great points about, okay, everybody knows it. The data is there. The science is there. The research is there that this is what should be happening. Why is it not happening? And I think that we came away with a couple of things that are my big points, and they're big points for me in general, which is we are still very much short-sighted, end of quarter focused. We're still very much focused on how do we get returns for our shareholders as the only main result or purpose of a company even existing. And that's a real kind of challenge that we've got to get into. And we still don't trust. We don't trust enough within the leadership, and the leadership doesn't trust the employees enough. And so we need to have longer term thinking. We need to have more balanced capitalism across all the stakeholders, and we need to develop more trust. And if we can do those things, we can start applying a lot of the principles that we already know work. And of course, changing those three things is not trivial. I liked his reference to the the Drucker Institute in Los Angeles, or at least in Southern California, and the fact that they're trying to shift that mindset away from exclusively thinking about shareholder capitalism. So those are my takeaways.
Yes, I think that's something we've seen in our projects often, the way companies are still using investments where within 3 to 6 months they expect a return. That's not how people work. People need to learn. They can learn on the job in the project very quickly, but the benefits will come a bit later. And companies don't seem to invest in that in the right way with the right expectation. So it's a big blocker, the short-term thinking and short-term gains are thinking. And Tom mentions how this is, and he uses different words here, how this is just a mindset that still comes from business schools that hasn't changed in the last 50, 60 years, despite the fact that Robert Townsend's book was on the top list of the Wharton School of Business, for example, for 50 years. It seems that everyone's reading it, but no one's doing it because the blocker and the incentive of short-term gains is so high. So it's interesting that important organizations like the Drucker School are starting to really work on ideas how to shift that. And I think we can generally see a trend even outside of the business schools. People who create new organizations are looking at new ways to form and shape companies down to the legal level, not just on the beanbag interior design level like we work. They're literally, because the shareholder value is legally ingrained in companies, people are looking at the legal aspects of organizations and how to change that. So in other words, short-term gains are blocking long-term progress and benefits. The main source of long-term benefits are people and their behavior, not technology. Technology only performs if the behavior is right, which means whatever technology you're using, if the people and the behavior around it doesn't work, your technology won't work and won't give you the benefits. So it's people. People only change and progress through trial and error. We are highly complex as individuals, as teams. So if you want to bring change and new value, you have to let people experiment, because every organization is unique because it's made out of unique people. If you don't let them experiment and expect benefits with the cookie cutter solution that everyone promises will save you, you'll likely go wrong. You'll fail. So then you have no benefits. So you need organizational agility, the agility to experiment in order to create the value for your organization in the way that works for you. That needs trial and error. There's no one size fits all. It just doesn't exist. So that customization or change period in order to get to the best benefits for your organization needs to be calculated in, and that needs organizational agility. That means you need the ability to fail, because on your first shot you will not get it right. There's too high a risk to get it wrong because organizations are so complex. If you give yourself that time, you will exponentially more easily succeed and get to your benefits. If you don't, then you're contributing to the 70% or more percentage of change projects that are not returning the business benefits you're looking for, and you're misinvesting. And that's in big parts missing. And the main reason for that is short-term gains that are blocking that phase to be part of your process.
And without using too many kind of trite words, it's agility, as in agile.
Yes, yes. Organizational agility is a thing that goes all the way from an individual and learning and being able to be open and using your best potential and being allowed to do so. So being allowed to fail, progress, learn.
Love those thoughts. Marcus, let's go to the interview.
Yes, let's.
Hello, Tom, and thanks for joining us in a very interesting times. So we're in week is it 8, 9 of the COVID-19 pandemic. The economic reality looks fairly bleak right now. Millions of people are out of their job. Businesses are in a situation that is unprecedented for most people on this planet. Some people have been through recessions, but not quite like that. We have comparisons back to the Great Depression back in the US. First question. You have been doing this for decades. You've seen a lot of things. You talk to a lot of organizations with a lot of very great advice and wisdom. What in this time, after 50 or 60 years of books and advice have been existing around the situation we're in, what we should be doing? What are your thoughts?
Well, one thing is, as you well know, you're dealing with an old man. And old men or women, whether you're religious or not, are thinking about the fact that they're not going to be around forever. And I'm trying to take advantage of that relative to the people who are half my age, and to say that this is an extraordinary moment. If you go back to the 1918 Spanish flu, this is a once a century moment, arguably at least. And Ms. or Mr. Business Leader, what you have done in the last handful of weeks, or what you will do in the next handful of weeks ahead, is your reputation, is what your life will have been all about. If you misbehave in May of 2020, you have put a big black mark against your professional and adult life, as far as I'm concerned. And so I'm in a empathetic mood, but relative to managers and leaders, I'm in a brutal mood. I have been saying since we started the Research for In Search of Excellence in 1977, put people first. And when we did the research in 1977, which led to In Search of Excellence in 1982, there was a big theoretical part of that book, which I doubt that any practicing managers read. But I did it for my conscience, if nothing else, because I had just gotten a PhD in organizational behavior at Stanford. And, we went back to McGregor, and we went back to Chester Barnard, and I don't remember how far we went back. We didn't go back quite to Adam and Eve, but we said there's a strand here, and probably McGregor is the most public godfather of it all. Theory X and Theory Y. Theory X beat the crap out of people, and Theory Y treat people as if they were, basically intelligent human beings. And so, I just am working on a new book, and it has 2 cover pages. And the first cover page deals with the excellence thing, and the second cover page just has 2 words on it: people first. And I said to somebody, this is my summa, this is my last act. And I've been saying people frigging first for the last 43 years. Won't somebody please listen? And, the book was a little bit selfish as a last act. Now it seems less selfish, because I think that people first message. Well, look, first of all, and let's talk to the people that you and I are talking to right now. My one-liner, which I sort of believe: if you are Tony Robbins and you walk into an audience of 1,000 people, you expect to change 1,000 lives. If I walk into an audience of 1,000 people, I hope that 3 people will really be influenced by what I've said. And those are people who believed what I said before I ever walked in the room, but I gave them a good, quick, stiff kick in the butt and said, let's get on with it. So, I'd love for us to, using American baseball numbers, I'd love for us to bat 1,000. I'd love for us to be, the Tony Robbins egocentric, let's get 1,000 out of 1,000. But, if you can get, what's the deal? And I'm not expert on this. There's some place in Israel, in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, where if you saved a single life, you get to plant a tree. If you can get to you guys, me guys, if you can really help a couple people seriously, you've had one hell of a good day. And so I'm more than willing to make this the latest or the last or the next to last or whatever effort to say, you do the people stuff, and my personal life test is, can I walk past a mirror, look at the mirror, and not barf? There's a wonderful thing. David Brooks is a New York Times columnist in the U.S., and he wrote a magnificent little column that was called Eulogy Virtues versus Resume Virtues. And he said the resume or the CV virtues is, where did you go to school? How many ranks did you go up in your corporation, or whatever else it is? And all of those kinds of accomplishments. He said the eulogy virtues are the ones where we ask questions like, how well did he treat people? How well did he take care of people? And, I think that little one-liner, eulogy versus resume virtues, is as good as anything as any of the Greek philosophers turned out. So that's my very long-winded answer to your question, but it's a complicated question.
I think it's really interesting. One of the things that I used to see written like in newspapers, or at least in a book that I read a long time ago, was on my headstone, I ask only to be remembered, because for them, life eternal was in the memories of those lives whose people they touched. And you wanted to touch people's lives in a positive way and leave a positive, lasting impression. So, walking past a mirror and not puking, I completely resonate with.
Right. Well, my third book was dedicated to the mayor of a very tough American city, Baltimore. His name was William Donald Schaefer. He made a lot of very good things happen in Baltimore, some of which have slipped back in the last 20 years, but that's another story. But when he retired from mayoralty to become the governor of Maryland, I was at the big goodbye party that was thrown in a hotel or something. And after all of us did all of our "Aren't You Great" stuff, Schaefer got up, and I still remember. He said, "I only want to be remembered by two words, which are on my tombstone, and the two words are, he cared." And, that's about as good as it gets. And, I think it's an awful time, and it's a wonderful time, because it is a time where, with the right effort, you really can be of significant help to a lot of people. And the stuff that infuriates me is, the stuff that I read that says bosses who are now doing the work from home thing, and they're doing Zoom all day long with 23 meetings, and they're trying to keep productivity up. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I hope they get a special seat on Dante's 9th or new 10th ring of hell. Fundamentally, it's a time to make a difference. And of course, the sucker play, which is the last 40 years of my life. If you do these things, you end up making a lot of money. I mean, it's not as if there's nothing altruistic about being thoughtful and caring and paying decent wages to your employees. It is the best known way to humankind, unless you got suckered in by the shareholder value maximization crap. It is the best way in the world long term to serve customers, to be part of communities, and so on. And so this should be the world's greatest good news story. And it is for some people. And the other thing, and I don't know whether this is a problem for you guys, I doubt that it is as much as it is, but this horrible thing called management gurus, which incidentally was started by The Economist magazine, this thing about, suppose there are a set of people like that, and obviously people identify me with that, so I can't escape. The management guru class acts as if 90% of the world work for either the FTSE 100 or the Fortune 500, and they pay no attention whatsoever to the smaller businesses. And the smaller businesses are the ones that create all the jobs, and where all of us work, whether we are Kenyans, Brits, Americans, Canadians, or whatever. And there are a lot of small business leaders who get this. And a lot of small business leaders, let me say, and not be a, I don't know what the term is, a smart aleck or what have you. I certainly understand the small business that has lost all of its clients and the person who started the business, let's call it a 10-table restaurant, had to mortgage his home and keep his kids out of school in order to start the restaurant, and now he can't pay the mortgage. I am not asking him to, or her, to play God relative to employees. So there are situations, obviously, where the word dire is not even significant enough.
What comes to my mind is that having worked in the last couple of years rather much larger organizations, the more I read that those ideas have been around for a long time. I've rarely seen them anywhere implemented like that. Why is there seemingly potentially a threshold where at some point that narrative stops and suddenly gets either pushed out of an organization upon a certain size, or it doesn't get through, only it's being paying lip service to, and seems to be really hard to at least be implemented? I mean, whenever I ever talk to a C-level person, they seem to still sort of get it, but they seem to at best struggle to ever implement this, to go people first and to make sure this really in place, actually working. There's enough case studies to show that that brings amazing value out of people, because people are going to be happier at work, they're going to be healthier at work, they're going to feel a purpose, they're going to feel safe, they're going to feel trusted. Have you ever seen where this sort of starts to really trip over, or why, any reasons why this suddenly has such a hard time to get into bigger organizations? Maybe it's the question.
Because we haven't shut down all the business schools in the world. We close their doors tomorrow morning, the world will be a better place. And we can come back to that. This Henry Mintzberg is a Canadian researcher. You guys probably know him. But Henry, I'm skipping answering your question, and I'll come back to it in a minute. Henry, one of Henry's many pieces of research, looked at graduates with professional degrees like engineering and business versus liberal arts graduates. And what he discovered, which is in retrospect, like most things like that, not surprising, at least the first half, is engineering and MBA grads got something like twice as many job offers, and the average starting salary was 50% higher than that for the liberal arts people. But then the fascinating thing that kicked in, at year 20, the liberal arts people had dramatically surpassed the professional school people. And, literally rank, salary, or at least on those kinds, those kinds of numbers. But, let's go back to your initial question. It's obviously lunacy to blame it on one person. And so this is a lunatic answer in part, and that is Milton Friedman, 1970, maximize shareholder value. And he basically said anything that smacks, and he used the frigging term of business is not in the business of social responsibility. It is there to make money for shareholders. But here are the hard numbers. In 1970, and these are American firms to be sure, in 1970, 50% of earnings went to shareholders, etc., and 50% of earnings went to employees, research and development, and so on. It is now 50 years later. Hard-nosed research that was done in about 2017 or something like that said we have now reached a point 50-50, remember? 50 for the shareholders, basically 50 for employees. That's not accurate, but it's a decent approximation. It is now 91% for shareholders, 9% for employees. And, the games that you have to play are games like, stock repurchases and all kinds of crap like that. So I won't blame it entirely on Friedman. There was also Michael Jensen at the Harvard Business School, who usually gets the same credit, as Friedman. But there was a dramatic change, at least among the big companies. Some of it, and obviously we could talk for 2 days, which I would rather do rather than a short period of time. There was a book, the name of which I don't remember, which I quoted recently. And the guy who wrote the book, who is a consultant, was sitting with a CEO, and they were going through the public-ish annual review and so on, and all kinds of good stuff had happened, and all kinds of wonderful reasons for that. They had taken care of employees, blah, 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 blah. And so our friend who wrote the book turned to the CEO and said, "Why do you think other CEOs don't do this?" And the CEO said, "I don't know, but I think they're kind of embarrassed. They think they should be looking at shareholder or at spreadsheets." But the other two things went through my mind. First of all was shareholder value, and the second one was that In Search of Excellence has, in retrospect, a day when everything changed, and it's a direct response to your question. And that day was when my co-author, Bob Waterman, and I, who were in the McKinsey San Francisco office, drove 30 miles down the road to Palo Alto, which is not the Palo Alto of today, and had a meeting with the president of the Hewlett-Packard Company. And on that day, I was introduced to the HP way, and in particular, I was introduced to MBWA, which is managing by wandering around. And managing by wandering around, to me, is the answer. I treat it as a metaphor, not something literal, and that's particularly true now with the work from home. But managing by wandering around means being in touch with the people who do the work. And, this doesn't sound believable, but I'm willing to put my hand on a Bible. We're wandering around with John Young, the president of HP, and there's a computer terminal, big old computer terminal on a desk somewhere, and this old guy is talking to this young kid who's 26 or 27, and John said, "Hey," he said, "come on over here. I want you to meet Bill Hewlett." And Bill Hewlett then, I don't know, he's probably in his 60s, and Bill was having just a chat with this kid, and they were just chatting with each other about the things the kid was working on and so on. But it was a miracle moment, and it's what I've been looking for ever since. I had this other, I hate words like epiphany, but my wife and I spend, not this year because of the problems, my wife and I spend a couple of months each North American winter in New Zealand. And we have a little, what's called a batch, short for bachelor, a little cabin on the Tasman Sea. And we have the most gorgeous beach in the world in front of us. And this was 2 years ago, and I was 75, and it's really embarrassing to be 75 and still thinking about management theory. But I was out on the beach, and I was thinking about, that's pathetic, most beautiful beach in the world. I'm on the beach, age 75, thinking about MBWA. But it's really embarrassing. But I had an epiphany, and I'm willing to call it an epiphany in this instance. And my epiphany was, why do you do MBWA? Do you do it to learn about what's going on at the front line? Sure. But you do MBWA for one reason, and that reason is because it's fun. Mm-hmm. It is a kick to be in the distribution center at 2 a.m. in the morning with the people who are slaving away and chatting with them about whatever else there is. And then my hard-nosed answer was, and if you are doing MBWA and it is not fun, return to your desk, find a piece of paper, find a pen, and put your resignation letter together. I really do. Somebody you may have run into, and as usual, I don't remember his name. There aren't as many books on hiring as there ought to be, and my bias is you should never hire anyone. And there are other measures, and I don't like the quant measure, but the EQ, the emotional quotient. Never hire anyone for any job who doesn't have a high EQ. The worst thing you can say academically is there are two kinds of people in the world. But there are two kinds of people in the world. There are people who give a shit about people, and there are people who don't really care all that much about people. one of my favorite quotes in my most recent book was from a guy, Peter Miller, I think is his name, and he heads a middle-size biotech startup. And his wonderful one-liner, which to me was delivered directly from God through the heavens, was, "We only hire nice people." And he said, okay, he said, "I'm in an incredibly complex business, and in order to be in some jobs, you have got to have some kind of a microbiology degree, and I know you two guys are smarter than any other human beings on earth, but where you and I don't even understand what the degree name is." But he said, let's take that degree, and it's, microbiology, neuromicrobiology. He said, guess what? There are actually in the world a lot of people who have those degrees. Don't hire the jerks. And it's not a matter of, frontline employees who are flight attendants at airlines. It is a matter of jobs where there are PhD science degree requirements. Hire the good ones, hire the nice ones. And he does, his is really hard nosed. You're the CEO. I'm telling you about my academic experience. You want to weep. It is so good. And your hand is itching to hire me. But I, the CEO, cannot hire you, because after you have interviewed with me, you must, and he used the term, not me, you must run the gauntlet. And running the gauntlet is about 15 interviews. And a couple of them may be with scientists. Others will be with the receptionist. They'll be with a 28-year-old in the finance department. And any of those 20 people or 10 people who you have to interview with has veto rights. They can say, nope, not a good fit. And, take your 11 years spent getting your PhD and sell it to somebody else. There was also, I'm really irritated that it didn't come out in time for my last book. There was a incredible, I am occasionally accused of using hyperbole, but this is not hyperbole. There is an incredible study that Google did, and it was a study of their best employees and their most innovative teams. And it is said by the person who reported it, there was shock and amazement in the executive areas. The best Google employees had 8 traits, and 7 of those traits were soft skills, like listening, cooperating, appreciating other people's points of view. And then the STEM stuff, the science, technology, engineering, and math, came in at the bottom. Then they did the most innovative teams, and the same damn thing happened. And what they discovered with the teams that weren't so good, that didn't have the people skills, there was intellectual bullying, which really rang a bell with me. It is some damn Stanford 23-year-old who has an IQ of 750 and knows that God endowed him with greater intelligence than any living human being on earth, and he is going to let you know about that. And Google did something which I think is absolutely appalling, disgusting, and stupid, and that is they classify people as A players and B players, which is a perfect way to demotivate 50% of the people in the organization.
Yeah.
But at any rate, it was the MBA. I don't know why people. Well, I do know. We promote the wrong people. We promote the people who have the technical skills. Let's talk for the next 3 hours, except it'll really be a dull tape because I will be weeping through most of it.
It's the way organizations still seem to sort of hire, and it's like it's been mine and Troy's issue for a long time, because we're not having one skill. We're sitting across, like T-shirt,
right,
whatever you call it. And the thing there is that, as you said, it's not just the managing by walking around, but again, we just did this survey about working from home. The biggest thing people are missing, they could walk up to a desk to someone, have a chat, and know what they're actually doing. The transparency that gives that to you, the value that it gives it to you as anyone working in a group of people, that you know what's going on and you know when you can help. There's a whole de-risking aspect to it, where we naturally do this, right? We talk to a couple of people when we feel uncertain. where we don't feel like safe enough to come up with a decision or knowing exactly what we need to know. And people do that every time. It's like a chef tasting the food while they're cooking is all good. A bit of extra salt, bit of extra pepper, same thing, right? There's this value. So and I like when you're saying, the managing by walking around, and then you talk about the lunches as well. Same thing, right? It's all this volume build up about you need to, if you know a bit more what's going on around you, you know your context better, you get more information streams, and sometimes also you get stuff done because you know the people who sit in the different areas, and actually you can get stuff done quicker because you can give them just a phone call. And then the value there is immense. As a consultant, you go into an organization where you don't know a lot. You don't know who to call, who to talk to, and whatever. And you spend time trying to establish that. So the quicker you get to the people who know each other, or you're in an environment where people know each other like that, they tell you in a split second, oh, just talk to him, and you get it done.
Absolutely.
That's efficiency. It's people have that purpose. They like those stories to share. Like, oh yeah, the guy from accountancy and over in HR and whatnot. And you know what? The developers, yeah, if you talk to the team guy over there, you'll get it sorted out. That makes a good company, right? What you just talked about is, I have about 100 case studies on that where people give different names to that, but there's evidence that this is enabling everyone to be happier
Right.
at work, to do more stuff, to get stuff done, and to generally just de-risk and actually run things better.
And to
really, really good
piggyback
stuff.
on top of that, what I find interesting is it's not just management by walking around and learning. It also gives the leader the chance to express the vision, to actually empower those people to make decisions, to let them do the leading from the front lines. And I think that sometimes the vision gets lost or it doesn't get communicated. I work with a lot of startups, and with a startup, everybody can knows what's going on because there's only 6 people in the organization. But when you've got 6,000 in an organization, and you get a situation like the current pandemic where everyone is suddenly remote working, you want to make sure that people feel like they're informed, that they're empowered, and that they can actually make change and move things forward without the kind of traditional micromanagement.
Yeah, I mean, I'd go both sides of that coin, and I haven't got it in front of me. It was one of those papers we sent you. There was a community college which put out something to all of its employees, a list of 10 things. And the 10 things on the list was, you're not supposed to be as productive as in the past. And, I got a tweet this morning of a guy who was beside himself with joy because in the middle of one of the work from home meetings, he was a boss. His 5-year-old came in and jumped up on his knee. Now, I've watched that happen or watched videos of it. And when the 5-year-old jumps up, dad tries to push, or dad probably, push the 5-year-old away. But when the boss picks the 5-year-old up and gives him a big hug, you have done one of the single greatest motivational acts in the history of humankind. And it really is huge. But
people can see that they're human.
MBWA is a metaphor.
Yes.
MBWA, which is why to me it works in the work from home thing. It is a metaphor for engaging with people. When you started the words you said, it reminded me years ago of a company that I visited, and they were working on new workspace, and they put a series of little comfy chairs or couches outside the restroom doors. And they said, people go to the restroom, come out of the restroom, and there are a couple of people there. And so why not sit down and have a random and casual chat? Because it is worth its weight in something that is so much. One of the things you said, by the way, I believe that we can do a lot of this stuff, and you used the exact language, in work from home. But what is going to be incredibly difficult is a work from home meeting is going to be the quote unquote right people to deal with the issue. And so at the work from home meeting about the product, you're not going to have the opportunity to have that casual chat with a person in finance or the person. And I really believe that lateral miscommunication, whether it's war and a big battle or whether it's, you know, a little commercial activity, lateral communication is everything. You know, there are two things that I believe in: lateral and down. You know, it's a silly term, but I call it sucking up versus sucking down. And the winners are the ones who suck down, and the losers are the ones who suck up. Unfortunately, that's not always true, which incidentally takes me to another of my favorite issues of the last 24 years. And that is, women are a lot more comfortable doing lateral and down stuff than men. You know, the whole women's thing started for me, and this is really bad to say because it sounds like stuff like this is crap, but it's true, with a conversation at a seminar of mine with a senior AT&T systems telecoms executive. And he said to me out of the blue, he said, "I only hire women." And I said, "Well, that's cool. What's the point?" And he said, women are willing to invest. Women don't worry about rank. They are totally willing to invest in conversations with people who are 3 levels below them. Guys are rank conscious, and they won't talk to anybody unless the person has the same rank as they do. And I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's actually not too much of an exaggeration. And, you know, God
Totally
bless
true.
it. Yeah. And yeah, I got in a fight on Twitter a few days ago that, you know, got my hackles up when, well, somebody was saying there are no gender differences. And, you know, I don't know. I want a Twitter button more than block, which is punch in the nose. Though I'm too old because everybody else is faster than I am and stronger than I am now. Not that I ever was very strong.
But the extension of that is, like, apart from the fact that I would totally agree with that, because I know plenty of women with kids, you know, when you talk about having on Zoom, the kid runs in, the guy goes, like, pushes the kid out.
Yeah.
The woman's first reaction would be to put the kid on their lap and, like, "Are you okay? You're okay? You're fine? Okay, fine. Now go back, please, because I'm doing some stuff," you know. They're inclusive, and they just go with it rather than
But
the guys
God,
who feel
what a motivator
confused
that is.
about it. And it's really weird. It's like, you know, the guys try to be non-human, and the women are naturally just going what they're being authentic, right? And the other thing is also then you go quickly to the inclusion. So because one of my backgrounds is service design, and you do a lot of research with customers, and one of the biggest thresholds I found is to get people out on the street into a shop, look at the store, look at what's actually going on, where you're selling your stuff, or where you're offering your offer. Most people don't even step out of their office. And you go, hang on a second. If you can't be amongst the people that you're actually serving, how are you ever going to get them? How are you ever going to include them? Why are you, there's plenty of places I went and we did workshops on, you know, ideas about what we should do. We had a lot of information about what the customer was doing. It was still a threshold to say, why don't we invite 2 customers in here? What do you mean 2 customers? But they're not working here. And it's like, isn't that safe and whatnot? It's like, no, get them in. Have them talk to actually us. Have you talk to them, see how they really feel, what they really want, and then act on it. It's a simple, cheap thing you can do, yet so many organizations have this weird, it's like people who step into a car and then get road rage, right? Second you step into a car, you get really impatient with everyone else in traffic. You become someone else. Why are you becoming someone else just because you walk into an office space? I don't get that. The second you walk out, you actually have the same complaints about the service and offer a product. So why don't you take those guys into a workshop, into your office, into whatever you have your workshop, and actually be inclusive, be authentic about it, and go like, yes, we really want to hear from you. That rarely happens. It's mad, right?
There was a guy, I don't know whether you've run anything into anything, I've forgotten what the business was, but he was fabulous. He would have a conference about every 3 months with customers who they had lost. He would say, listen,
that's good.
Why? What did we do? And he said he did it because he genuinely wanted to learn, but he said it was a sucker play. 80% of them ended up coming back.
Exactly.
I mean, there are two issues. I mean, there's my issue or my, magic formula where I want to hire for EQ, but the part I think you referred to earlier, which is scarier, is why do people have these instincts and then lose them when they get into an organization? And I do think starting with a high EQ helps, but there are a lot of people who think they're supposed. There was a story somebody told me 1,000 years ago, and it sounds silly, but it has some resonance. And there was a guy who got promoted to boss, and he hid in his office. And some consultant like you guys came around and talked to him, and they said, "Why do you hide in your office?" And he said, "Because that's what bosses are supposed to do." And he said, "Why do you say that?" And he said, "Because that's what my boss did." And literally, I mean, it sounds so juvenile to say that, but there's a lot of truth in it. I mean, on the other side of the coin, life is complicated. Open all the research says open offices don't work, and which thrills the daylights out of me, but that's selfish because I die before I work. Oh, I've got to make my book plug. We are 20 years into the century, and I am willing to anoint a business book as best business book of the first 19 years of the century, and that is Susan Cain's book, Quiet. Have you had Susan on?
We've not had Susan on. One of my friends was just telling me about the book Quiet. She was really, really enjoying it. So it's already on my reading list.
Yeah, I adore it. I mean, what she basically says is, and I remember the first time after I read the book when I went to speak to a group, she basically says we dismiss roughly 40% of the population who are introverts. And, she goes through the research. And if you're an extrovert, you are considered smarter. You are considered more creative. You are considered to be more physically attractive just because you run at the mouth. And there's an incredible bias against introverts, because you're doing an interview and you ask an introvert a question, and Jesus, the guy actually thinks before he answers. But he's sitting there silently for 45 seconds, at which point you decide he's dumb. And he's sitting there actually because he's smart. But it's a beautiful, beautiful book. And Susan has, lawyer training. And I only say that because this is not somebody with a philosophy degree from Oxford who is going on about the wonderful things in life. She's trained as a lawyer. The book has got enough hard-nosed research to, sink an ocean liner. And it's just, and she started something. It's web-based. You can check it out before you get in touch with her. And it's called The Quiet Revolution. And she's really pushing this thing. And I remember because, I'm just a crackpot. I read the book and I went in and I was talking to leadership in a multi-billion-dollar electronic companies. And I said, by the way, I just read this book and I want to declare here publicly, you all in this room are jerks. And if you do that with a smile, you can get away with it. And I said, because my strong suspicion is you are pissing away 50% of the world's talent. And, we had a lovely, friendly conversation. But that also, incidentally, calling people jerks goes back to the other conversation. I am, he said with absolute humility, I am considered to be a pretty good speaker. And I am convinced that I have only got one secret, and that is I am one of the better readers of body language. If you can read the body language of an audience, you can give a good speech. And I believe that religiously. I actually talked to a psychiatrist and asked him whether I was nuts about this. I said, my guess is that during a speech in the course of 5 minutes, I probably make 50 to 100 micro adjustments to what I'm saying based on some liminal stuff about you're in the third row and you're frowning, and I am desperate to get that frown off your face. And so I use a little bit of a different tone and so on.
Does that kind of factor into the fierce listening that you mentioned in one of your papers? Because it's almost listening beyond just the words. It's listening to the body language.
Absolutely. Well, and you know, and this is interesting relative to work from home. There's a Stanford Business School researcher who, well, it's based on others' research, which is then reinforced by her own, that says your body language is 5 to 7 times more important than the words you use. And, you know, and she says the research is there so you can put a quant number on it. You know, you can say 5 to 7 times more powerful. And, you know, I believe that in spades, which, you know, is another issue where there are quantitative numbers is, and I'd always heard the number 7 to 8. And again, I trust the sources. Positive commentary is 30 times more powerful than negative commentary.
Yeah, I heard similar things about 10, 15 years ago where, was it 85% of communication is actually body language. It's not verbal. It's that part. So it's significantly more impactful. Yeah.
And I think we can do eyeball body language stuff in work from home, maybe. I am deeply concerned about it.
Think about the old days when they talked about on telephones, so long before Zoom or anything else like this. And they said, if you're on the phone, smile while you're on the phone, because your smile will come through. I mean, it's not the words, but if you're physically smiling, the tonality comes through and people can tell a difference.
Absolutely. You know, I don't want to acknowledge that I agree with a single word that has ever come out of Tony Robbins's mouth. But the one I did buy was some line that said, before you walk into an office or what have you, stand in front of a mirror and smile for 30 seconds. And, you know, apparently you can demonstrate that the musculature transformation actually does neurobio stuff in your brain. And, you know, we're doing all the neuro research now, which shows what lights up when you do this, that, and the other. But that makes perfect sense to me. I bought a book years ago that was called 1 Minute Meditation. Excuse me. I have got a cough that is 5 months old, came from the summer. It doesn't mean that I'm sick. So, you know, I'm always nervous when I'm coughing.
We'll edit that part out.
Yeah, we can cut that out. Don't worry.
You can cut that out. Yeah. But anyway, whatever. Yes. I'm actually, he said with total confidence, I know it's going to fail. I'm actually working with a good business school dean now, and we are trying to see if we can use this as a moment to put the people courses ahead of the finance courses and use this magical moment as maybe an opportunity for a little of MBA reformation.
That sounds great, because I think I read somewhere you were waiting to be called out or asked to put a proper MBA program together for some.
There's a lot of baloney to that. There are great people in MBA programs. There's no question.
Of course.
So I'm not quite the jerk that I appear to be.
But if I take it's good that someone pushes these things out a bit harder, because otherwise no one seems to be listening. But if I take a couple of things there together and adding some of our own experience, like, you know, there seems to be this thing where maybe today more than ever, as an organization, you really need to connect to reality, right? And reality means you connect to people. That means the customers or whatever you offer, to understand what they actually want, to have a purpose as an organization, and internally for the people who make the organization to understand better, to enhance and produce better processes internally so that people actually can work the best way they can. Why are you not closer to reality as an organization to actually create impact?
I haven't got a clue.
What do you think?
I haven't got a clue. No, I mean, I'm like you. I want it to be a magical moment. And God knows I want it to be over. You know, there's a lot of suggestion that we're going to be dealing with this for a year or so. And I hate to use the word that will help, but relative to the transformation, you would have to be pretty deaf, dumb, and blind not to have it change you. And you will be surrounded by people who become ill. You may lose a loved one, and you hope that's a transformational thing. And you hope, since you are an intelligent person, that you will bring that into your working life. I'm a little angry at myself right now. And that is because when I look back, and I'm talking about specific words in the English language, I've used the people stuff, I haven't used the word community enough. And I'm becoming a nutcase, and I want to be more and more of a nutcase on two dimensions. First of all, an organization is a community. And if you think about it as a community, you won't think about it quite so much as an organization chart. And secondly, relative to your point, particularly about customers, is I've stopped using the word customers, and I now use the word customers and community. As a small business person with, not tiny, I mean, that's incredibly important too, but let's call it that 50 or 100 person organization. I'm a community member. I'm important to the community. I owe things to the community. And, I'm just, as I said, and this has come out of all this, I'm a nutcase about that word. And, with any luck, it'll stay that way. Will there be a transformation or not? I really don't have a clue. I am a born pessimist, which surprises some people. And as are you guys and probably a lot of people, I am reading a lot, and there is incredible confusion in the data. But if the economic situation gets as bad as it could get, I don't know what the hell's going to happen, socially, politically, or otherwise. There was a Medium article a few days ago that went around and got a bit of fuss. It said charmingly, it's all over for the UK and the United States. Other people may pull out of this thing, but not the Brits and the Americans. And unfortunately, the argument was not entirely specious. We do have the problem of the two blonde guys who are running our countries, but that's for another day's effort. Two blonde guys with really bad hair days every day. I haven't got any magic, and as great as you all are, neither do you, but we can hope, and we can do our professional best to and you probably have had more practical experience in the last 90 days than I have. There are people who have risen to the occasion, and there are people who haven't risen to the occasion. There are people who are pushing their WFH teams for productivity, and acting as if life is exactly the same as it was, except you just don't happen to be in the office. But there's got to be some transformation, but it's not going to be as much as I want, and as from judging from our last few minutes together, as you guys want. But once again, we're not going to change everybody, and relative to what the three of us are doing together right now or with our lives, maybe we can help a few people and catch a few people who are on the cusp. I don't consider that as a loss. I consider it as a win. I really do buy the Israeli thing, assuming it's true, that if you can help a small number of people have a slightly different view of the way they work in the world, God has given you a great gift in that regard. And I'm not a religious person, so I guess it's a lowercase g God.
I've got two things I want to say. One thing I want to say and one question. You were talking about the word community. And when I talk about how we got here, and it used to be that capitalism pre-1970 was balanced across all the different stakeholders, which were shareholders, customers, employees, the community, i.e. taxes, and the environment. And then it got very unbalanced to where only the shareholders mattered. And trying to find a way back to a more balanced version of capitalism is something that I think that we've got an opportunity to do on the environment, on the community, on the customers, on the employees, without totally shafting the shareholders in the process. And that kind of spins me into my question, which is, in the UK, British Airways, the flag carrier, has decided that out of 42,000 employees, they're going to lay off 12,000. They don't see airfare or air travel returning for the next 18 to 24 months. I know a number of BA employees, one of which is my partner, and they all say the same thing. You know what? Redundancies are going to happen. People are going to lose their jobs. We get it. But at the same time, BA is trying to redo the contract to apply worse working conditions and lower salaries and capitalize on this pandemic as a way to make their main product, which is indeed the customer service given by the cabin crew, given by the flight crew, given by the people who work the desks and the baggage handlers, and taking advantage of them when they shouldn't. If you're the CEO of British Airways, how do you go into a boardroom and say, no, we're not going to screw the employees, we're going to double down, and we're going to take good care of the people that we still need? How do you say that in a boardroom?
You have to have balls. that's a ridiculous. You probably remember from a few minutes ago, I talked about the company where I introduced the Susan Cain stuff. And I remember talking to the CEO, and it was electronic components, and I think it was about a $3 billion company. And he said, when I talk to my board members, I tell them that if they want a 50% increase in profits in the next 18 months, I know exactly how to give it to them. He said, unfortunately for them, they'll have to get rid of me because I'm not going to do it. And I worked for McKinsey for years, and it has gotten a bad rep in the last couple of years for, unfortunately, very good reasons. But the thing that nauseated me most was a guy, I don't remember his name, but he headed one of the pharmaceutical companies, and he really misbehaved. But there was a consulting practice at McKinsey that was informally called buy and cut. You buy a firm, you get rid of 30% of its employees, and you are guaranteed to have 36 months of increased profitability before the whole damn thing implodes. And, that literally makes me nauseated. I will say, I really want to turn you guys on to the people who run the Drucker Institute down in over in Claremont in the LA area. And they really are going after this shareholder value maximization stuff. But there is extraordinary research done by McKinsey that says the long-term investments pay off in dollar numbers that are un-effing believable. You just don't get it the first year. And I don't, we both know, I was born many more yesterdays before you were, but we both know, having not born yesterday, that if that CEO does have the guts and does have the nerve and is willing to retire and is willing to give up his frigging stock options and is willing to not take his $30 million home, he can do it, or she can do it. and I'm try to be totally focused on women, but being an old boy, it takes balls, it takes guts, it takes, I don't get it. I just don't get why having $75 million in the bank is not enough for you and you need another 25 from your stock options. I don't understand these people as human beings. I just never want, I said to somebody, and Jamie Dimon, partially because he's probably physically attractive and has a nice smile, I would love to be in a meeting and be introduced to Jamie Dimon and have the pleasure of being unwilling to shake his hand. He had $40 billion in fines for screwing up during that crisis in 2007, and we still treat him like an adult. I don't know what, the old too big to jail. I don't know whether he ought to be in jail or not, but no living human being should ever have to have COVID or no COVID to have your hand infected by his hand. I did once achieve my dream in that regard, and it was when I was teaching at Stanford, and they had an advisory board meeting, and Robert McNamara was on the advisory board, and I had spent 2 years in Vietnam, and so I had the great privilege of being introduced to him and not shaking his hand. You don't get many opportunities like that in life. Serve no practical purpose at all, but
I'm terribly sorry we get you to this dark place.
Well, you have.
I'm sorry.
Damn question about why the CEO doesn't have the nerve to blow.
Well, look. I just said earlier this week a story that I didn't know either, and that comes back from history. It's not a personal one, but I think we've all been tormented and pummeled and didn't quite understand why certain things are the way they are. But so I just heard a story about back in Henry Ford, where actually back when he introduced, I think, de-skilling, whatever factory thing he did, which at the time was a great cunning solution to things and to entail mass production. But I think what he did at some point, people say, what someone told me earlier this week, was that he changed what at the time was a 12 to 16 hour day to an 8-hour day and doubled workers' salary, and everyone called him absolutely crazy. And then months later, the productivity went through the roof. So he proved everybody wrong. Now, that was even a longer time ago than we've been on this earth. And, now we're seemingly slithering back to that. I mean, ask me, I've been spending 14-hour days by month over month on projects. And I've seen organizations asking more and more hours, often unpaid, from people in order to enhance productivity by basically just adding more unpaid hours. And it's all this crazy factory setting on, is that all you have? Like a good 100 years ago or more, someone said that actually, no, that's not a great idea to grind people down. Let's give them some extra time to think. And then you might actually get innovation, or at least some considerable, they can actually make some informed decisions because they have the time to think about it, by the way. So they're not just going to be factory drones anymore. So I just looked at that earlier this week. I'm like, Jesus, this is insane, right? Have we learned anything? So we talked a lot about things where, similar organizations are not learning anything. But so, and I'm aware of time, so we need to wrap this up very soon. So is there a single thought how we can get a better narrative out? Because it seems to be it's a lot about communication. Just like any change and transformation project I've ever been in, it's 50% success is about communicating this right, talking to people, helping people that everyone understands what actually is going on and what we want to do. Do we have hope for that?
Well, I think there's some hope. I do want to reinforce one thing that you said. Dov Froman, who was an Intel guy and one of the godfathers of Israeli high-tech industry, wrote a wonderful book called Leadership the Hard Way. And one of his first things is he said the average leader should have 50% unscheduled time. And he said kind of what you just said. He said, leaders are paid to think. and not to react. But the only problem I have, and I know we're not going to disagree about this, is it goes back to body language and so on. Communication per se, I'm not sure. Fierce listening, yes. You know, there was a wonderful one-liner. Well, I've heard a couple of versions of it, but the one I remember was Churchill's mother, who was an American, said, "I went to a dinner, and when you talked to Mr. Gladstone at the end of the conversation, you knew that he was the smartest person in the world. When I turned to my left and talked to Mr. Disraeli at the end of the conversation, you thought you were the smartest person in the world." And you know, I've heard other commentary like that. I mean, it's with two PMs, it makes it, you know, a little bit more powerful. But I watched it. I was not involved with the administration, so I'm not showing off. Bill Clinton was like that. Clinton, and I've heard junior people say it. I did sit next to him at dinner one time. He absolutely makes you feel as you're the only human being on earth. You have no idea that you're talking about a person who had 7,000 nuclear weapons, you know, at his command. He makes you feel good. So, and I don't want to even use words like genuine communication. I mean, we have to remember, first of all, that communication is two ways. And I've never even heard of a good training course in listening, but there's no reason why there shouldn't be one. And when I was writing something about listening a couple of years ago, I just went to Amazon and found 25 books, and I'm sure most of them aren't great, but on the topic of listening, you can break it down like neurosurgery, and you can probably not transform yourself, but you can get a little bit better. And back to the other topic, it is clear neurobiologically that women are better listeners than men. There's a wonderful little experiment. It was in a book, it was reported in a book called The Female Brain. And by day 3 after birth, the female baby is making 3 times more eye contact with her fellow human beings than the male is. And it is that Darwinian community thing, I believe. It is, I totally agree with you with, I don't know how to answer the question. You've got to care. It's the, you know, my guy who said he wanted his tombstone to say he cared. I've got to feel something about you as my fellow human being. I think I can communicate with negative vibes as well as I can with positive vibes. And so that's why I'm not willing to buy the word communication per se. I've got to have a couple of adjectives around it. I gotta, but my wife is always on my case if we're ever in a cab or an Uber, because I like to talk to taxi drivers. And she said to me one time, and this was, we were in Washington, D.C., she said, "Why do you always like to talk to taxi drivers?" And I said, "Susan, because they're much more interesting than you and I are. You know, you go to Washington, D.C., and half the taxi drivers are Ethiopian. They've gone through starvation. They've gone through revolution. They probably had a second cousin who was beheaded 3 blocks away from home. They know so much more about life than you and I do." And that's not a throwaway line. You know, it really is the case. I mean, the other thing I've said about that is if you have more than a 30-minute cab ride and you do not know the names of the cab driver's children and what years they are in school, I don't want to know you as a human being. I had a wonderful thing happened in London. I was doing something, and a guy was driving me around. I felt honored because he also drove Mick Jagger, but he was driving me around, and he looked at me at one point. He said, "You know, there are two kinds of people who sit in the back seat of this car." And I said, "Okay." He said, "There are people who remember their roots, and there are people who think they deserve to be there." And, I thought that most of life was explained with that single sentence. But, give me the one who remembers their roots, and I think the communication will be different than from the one who thinks that he or she ought to be sitting in the back seat. And I don't know how we bring about change in that. You're younger than I am. You can worry about it more than I do.
Yes, the people who are probably sitting there thinking they deserve to be driven around, don't even know where they're driving to. They just say like, "Oh, get me home. I don't know where I live," I think it's a great final statement to bring us back to the essence of what we've been talking about, was get back to humanity. Like, look at who people are, what they want, who we are. That's going to save you. So thank you so much, Troy.
Yeah, and thanks very much for being on the Wicked podcast. We will be in touch with you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.
Thank you for listening to the Wicked podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. You can find all relevant links and a way to contact us in the description. And please like, share, and subscribe, and we hope we see you next time.